Okay, thank you, Alexa. So firstly, just hands up everyone that's ever moved to another country. All right, pretty good, pretty good. Well, my family, we've got a history of migrations. So in actual fact, we've been migrating for 55 years. And in that 55 years, my family's migrated 13 times. Okay? And the first of which was way back in 1963, when they left Eastern Europe from a country that no longer exists. They travelled through Slovenia and ended up in Naples, Italy, where they stayed in a refugee camp for 6 to 9 months or so. After that, they got accepted to come to Australia, and they went on a voyage on the SS Roma from Naples, or Messina more specifically, and spent 6 months on that voyage, ended up in Fremantle, and then on to Melbourne in Australia. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what has that got to do with migrating to AWS? And if you really think it through, there are a lot of parallels between that sort of personal journey and moving to the public cloud. So if you imagine the fear, the uncertainty, that concept of the unknown that faces you as an organisation or as a technical department in terms of moving your workloads to the cloud, where you are faced with a new language, if you will, a new culture, and there's uncertainty whether that whole journey is going to be worth it and what the payoff is. And it's this fear of the unknown that holds our customers back, I think, from my observations over the years in terms of really getting on that ship and taking that voyage into that public cloud. And specifically what I'm talking about here is the factors that you see on your screen. So things like having a very outdated server and application inventory. It's a very rare thing when I walk into a customer engagement and the customer tells me we've got a very firm handle on what we have running in our environments, in our data centers. And there's also that the concept of legacy. A lot of customers have an overwhelming number of applications that are just no longer supported. And that sort of transformation type of initiative just hasn't happened for a long time. Furthermore, when customers think about undertaking a migration to AWS, there's that fear or the unknown of, what process are we going to apply to do the work? And what does that plan look like? Finally, the lack of a business case is one of the main hurdles that customers have to confront in terms of undertaking this sort of initiative. It's very important to understand what you're trying to achieve, what your objectives are, and have a model, effectively, in terms of what that payoff is going to be, what the return on the investment is going to be. Now, what better way to illustrate these concepts than a customer case study? And this is a case study where professional services were called in to help with the migration that had actually stalled after 3 months. And the business outcome that the customer was seeking in this case was they were looking to have an accelerated engagement and get out of a data centre in 12 months due to that lease expiring. They also wanted to benefit from some business transformation. So whilst there was a hard deadline to meet, they also wanted to uplift the capability of some of their applications in concert with that DC exit, and also to facilitate innovation. The solution, or what really helped them to achieve this, was the application of our best practices in terms of how do you go about doing these types of projects and these types of migrations, and more specifically, what tools and processes need to be applied in executing that work. And I mentioned briefly that challenge. So that DC exit, they had 9 months left to exit that DC, 1,000 servers in scope. When we were called in to assist with this engagement, the project had stalled, so there were 0 servers or applications moved in the first 3 months, and It was a complete reboot of that project and that program for the customer. So some of the challenges specifically, important one is organisational strategy. It just wasn't clear across the business or the entity. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve? I've mentioned the inaccuracy of a lot of customers' CMDBs and that server inventory. Internally also, the application owners just didn't have a handle or didn't know how far their application footprints extended. And again, that business case. So, and the last one there is unsure of their migration strategy. How should they treat those workloads? What should they look like in the cloud? Are they just trying to do a like-for-like migration? Or again, uplift and make those applications more cloud native? Or a hybrid approach, a mix of both, but for which ones? So if you scrutinise that list, one thing you'll notice, there is nothing technical really on that list. They're all non-technical challenges, underpinned, underwritten by the need to basically have a clear path of communication internally, and that includes not only your internal staff, but your MSPs and partners that you engage, and really have everyone lined up to support this migration or transformation effort. So let's just take a step back and talk about methodology and process here. And we were called into this engagement, as I mentioned. There were two key roles that we played. One was what we call as a migration success manager, and the other one is as a migration technical lead. So one is focused more on people, governance, business perspectives, and the other one is by nature more technical in terms of platform primarily, but then supported by security and compliance considerations. So effectively, when we're called in this engagement, there were 8 work streams that we oversaw and were involved in. The first one is discovery and planning. We'll talk about tooling later in the session. We'll have a demonstration from my colleague, but getting that firm grip on what is out there, and not only having a list of applications, a list of servers, but how do they interact? That is key to executing a migration with precision and using tooling to have a very sharp view of what you have in your environment. The second thing is a landing zone. So the foundation of the platform itself, what needs to be built out as that foundation, how many applications or servers does it need to support? What are your future growth plans? That base on the platform is all important so that you don't have to rework that at a later time. Skills and COE, or Centre of Excellence. The people side is the most important. So that is also, I mentioned the communication angle on that, but also in terms of you look at your current technology staff, what they do in their day, what tasks and responsibilities do they have, and how is that going to change in terms of moving to the public cloud? And that involves also looking at doing an assessment on the current skill set, but also along the lines of career paths, because those roles are going to change. They're not going to be the same as they are today operating out of your data centres. Migration business case. So there are varying levels that you can get to in terms of precision, in terms of a business case, but having essentially a 5-year view at a minimum in terms of what that total cost of ownership looks like on your current path versus going to the cloud, and getting the metrics out of that in terms of what the expected payoff is a critical thing to get the funding that you need to proceed with your migration project as an overall program. Security and compliance. So we have a saying at AWS, security is job zero, and everything associated with that. I'm continually amazed at the amount of automation that the platform provides to you and that you can leverage. And so one analogy I point out to customers is, if you've got 1,000 servers in your estate and you're going to go all in on AWS, you're going to go to the cloud, and you have 4 security people, okay? If over time your business or your services grow to, say, 2,000 servers, in the cloud, you don't need to double the amount of security personnel. You have a wealth of tools and, again, automation available to you to do continuous compliance checking and a lot of very, very interesting things that are just not possible today. So again, and that ties in obviously to the skills and COE perspective as well. Operating model. So very similar concept in terms of, okay, well, how do you operate today? Who's involved in undertaking those support processes and so on? And what does that look like in the target state in terms of moving to AWS? There's a lot of change there. Well, I should probably state that is, you have the opportunity to sharpen that and make a lot of changes to optimise those process flows and what that model looks like. Migration experience. So one of the key things that we try and impart on customers is this sort of engagement or process or initiative. It's not just, you know, having the answer up front and knowing exactly how this is going to work. There is a framework, a proven framework available to you, but most importantly, applying that framework in your environment is going to be, you're going to customise that to some extent, right? So we really encourage customers to pilot the migrations of a set of applications. And that can be 5 applications or piloting 3 distinct patterns and types of application. And getting that experience will allow you to have that aha moment in terms of understanding the best way to execute this sort of project, but also then to sharpen and tweak the process to what suits you in terms of your environment and the personnel that you have. And then underpinning, or the output of all that, is really the migration plan. And what that gives you is essentially a whole backlog of what you're going to migrate, those applications, and also a sequenced view of what order things should be migrated. And you know, that is your blueprint for executing your migration, which comes after the readiness and planning. And this is we call this the migration factory. And effectively, the one thing to take away from that model is it's not linear, meaning you'll have your backlog, you'll start your execution, application will go through that cycle, and if you have an issue in terms of validating or testing an application in terms of what's being stood up in AWS, you may go back to the design step. You may realise and you know, uncover something that you weren't aware of before, and again, you make those changes, you adapt to what is the optimal outcome and target for that application. Now, in terms of tooling, so there are a wealth of tools available to customers all along the end-to-end chain in terms of undertaking a migration. And these are tools that are both native to AWS platform, but also from third parties as well. And we've used these extensively in our engagements in the ANZ region and also throughout Asia. So firstly, when you undertake an assessment and getting a list of service application inventory, we've used, for example, in a lot of engagements, you've used risk networks to undertake that sort of activity, but we've used the other ones on the screen as well. In undertaking a business case, again, there are offerings available to you from third parties. For readiness and planning, you'll see there is the application discovery service from AWS, and again, some of these other third-party tools. And you'll notice that there are some of these tools cover obviously more than one part of the lifecycle chain. And in application dependency mapping, there are these offerings that have been proven in the last few years in the marketplace as well. And likewise for application or actual workload and data migrations and undertaking validation. Now, in terms of this session, the tools that you see highlighted there are the ones that my colleague will demonstrate to you shortly. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Girish Nesaratnam. So Garish is a member of our migrations practice in ANZ, and he has been involved with, I've lost count of number of projects he's been involved with in Asia and also ANZ. But the great thing about Garish's involvement is that he has provided a wealth of feedback to our partners, our technology partners, in terms of tool usage and providing suggestions for enhancements. So we're very privileged to have Garish with us today. And with that, I'll pass over to Garish.
Thanks. Thank you. So as Neil mentioned before, there were three main themes as takeaways from what we spoke about, and I'm going to now just show you three different demos that tie into those themes. The first one being the fear of the unknown. So I'm going to walk through risk networks. I'm going to show you how we can use the tool to perform some deep discovery of your environments, look at dependency mapping, network traffic, analyze ports and protocols between servers, group servers into application stacks, and then ultimately use all of this information that it's gathered to build a data-driven decision and ultimately have a backlog for your migration plan. The second thing I'll be covering is around the view of getting some cost analysis and building out a business case. So I'm going to use TSO logic to help use the information. Again, it gathers information, it right-sizes instances, and ultimately can automate the creation of your business case. And then finally, the theme around getting on that ship. So I'll be using AWS Migration Hub and AWS Server Migration Service, and I'll show you how you can use the tool to automate, manage, and monitor your AWS migration. So let's kick this off. So I'll just refresh this just in case it timed out. But what we've got here is risk networks. So it's an agentless tool. You deploy the tool in your, you deploy a virtual appliance in your environment, provide it credentials, and it goes ahead and starts discovering all the devices and servers that are currently running in your environment. And you can see that it looks like a bit of a spaghetti mess, but we've seen a lot worse in some of our larger enterprises. So it's very common to see a lot of these connections between your servers and application stacks. Now, at a glance, we can also see where your assets or where your servers are located. So we can see just at a very high level, your major data centers, number of servers, different types of devices as well, and we can start drilling down to start making decisions based on this data that it's gathered. So I'm going to click on this customer service app, and let's look at it in a bit more detail. So what we've got here is an application called the customer service app. You can see we've got the two Nginx reverse proxies, 4 web servers, and a shared database. Now, what Risk Networks also has done is it's gathered performance and utilization data. So you can see here that for my CPU, RAM, and storage, I'm actually over-provisioned for what I use on each one of these applications. And even with CPU utilization, you can see that at its max, it's still not using the amount of CPU that's been provided to this application stack. So why is this important to us? Because in AWS, you really only want to provision resources for what you use, even at its peak. So we're going to now use this information to right-size our instances when we start mapping it to AWS instances. And I'll show you how to build that out in a business case as well. But before we do that, let's dive in a bit deeper. So what we can do now is look at communication between servers within that application stack. So I've just clicked on that web server to the shared database server. And you can see that it tells us the source and destination IPs, but also the protocol and ports, and source and destination ports. So this is important because when we start migrating these servers to AWS, ultimately you want to use this information to automate or to build out your security groups so that it's entirely locked down and we know exactly what servers are communicating with each other in your application stacks. What this tool can also do is it can show you what dependent stacks. So outside of that customer service app before, we can see that my customer service app here talks to the contact center app, and we've got ServiceNow, for example, as well. So you can see that, hey, this particular application stack does have other dependent stacks as well. And you can dive in a bit deeper and look at what's actually happening between these communications, between the application stacks. And we can see right now that, oops, let me just zoom out a bit. Okay, that's zoomed out way too much. But what I was going to show you here is that the customer service app talks to the contact center app on that shared database. So you can see that the contact center app seems to be talking to my customer service app's database. Now, we can use this information as you start building out your migration plan to map your dependencies. So quite easily, we can see what service and application stacks are talking to each other. Now, what I'm going to do now is actually use all this data that we've gathered and all the metrics to automate or to build out a migration plan. So what we're going to do here is start applying metrics and scores against tags on your entire application portfolio. So in this example, I'm going to prioritize any server that uses a lot of storage. And let's just assume that, hey, I'm running out of storage in this environment. I don't want to purchase new kit. So anything that's consuming a lot of storage, I want to bring that up my migration list so that I can start migrating it to AWS. So I'm going to say I want to mark that as very important, and I want it to positively impact my score. Next thing I want to do is, in terms of connectivity, I want to deprioritize anything that's way too chatty or that's got way too much dependencies on other servers and other applications. So I want to do the things that are not so chatty first because I want to reduce the impact of my migration. And then let's say, for example, I want to prioritize one of my data centers above the others. Maybe I'm about to run out of a lease for one of the data centers, so I'd like to prioritize the servers in that data center first. So I'll choose Melbourne as this data center, and again, I want to positively impact the score so that it brings it up the list. Now, there are a bunch of other tags and metrics that you can apply scores to, but I'll just stick with the 3 for the purpose of this demo, and let's calculate this. So what this has now done is, and I'll just go to the scorecard, it's used the metrics that we've applied to it, or the scoring that we've applied to it, and it's built out a high-level backlog of what your prioritization or migration plan should look like. And you can see in this example here, our data warehouse application stack is on top of the list because we've prioritized storage above the others. And of course, it applied the other metrics around connectivity, et cetera. So you can quite easily make data-driven decisions using all the information that Risk Networks has gathered in your environment, and you can back up your migration plan with data. So now that we've got a migration plan, we've understood what we've got in our environment, I'm now going to switch over to TSO logic, and we're going to build out a business case. So what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm going to look at the customer service app that we spoke about before, and we're going to start building out a migration plan so that you can understand what the costs are in AWS. So TSO logic, very similar to Risk Networks, is an agentless tool. You drop it in your environment, provide it credentials to your vCenters, and it can start gathering performance data. So by default, it uses industry averages, and it can give you a view of what the costs are for this particular application stack running on-prem. And we're going to start creating a scenario for AWS. So I'm just going to call this 3-year RIs. I'm going to choose Sydney as our region. And we've also got the option of choosing different purchasing options. Now, I'm going to pick the 3-year reserved instances all up front. Now, reserved instances is a method or purchasing option for AWS resources at a significant discount. So we've got a number of different options in here, but I'll just choose the 3-year RIs. Now, there are other options within TSO logic to optimize your licensing on AWS as well. So it can create different scenarios or different views based on your enterprise agreement or your licensing agreements with Microsoft. But I'll leave this unticked for now. And we also have the option, if you want to scale up or scale down in terms of over-provisioning CPU or different types of storage as well, you do have the flexibility of doing that. But for the purpose of this demo, I'll stick with just the defaults. So now, what this has done is TSO Logic has automatically right-sized these instances. Now, you would have noticed before we had very high CPU provision, but not completely utilized, similar with the RAM and storage as well. So we've now built, or TSO Logic has automatically built out a cost profile on what these resources would cost in the Sydney region. And you can see that there's significant I guess, cost savings just by migrating to AWS when you right-size your instances. Now, the other thing we're going to do now is actually create a cash flow view. So we'd like to know what this would look like over the course of 5 years. In this scenario, I've built it out for 5 years. So you can see that over the course of 5 years, we've got both the AWS and the on-prem costs. And if you notice here, the AWS costs in year 1 is actually a little bit higher than the on-prem costs. And there are 2 reasons for that. First being, because I picked the reserved instances as 3 years all up front, that's factored into the cost in year 1. But the second one being, I've also factored in the cost to migrate as well. Because when you start migrating these workloads, you're going to have to you're going to have to factor in costs for resources to migrate the environment. Now, even with the migration costs factored in, over the course of 5 years in this scenario, there's still significant savings, up to 40%, I think, in this example, just by migrating these workloads to AWS. So what I've shown you here is, with TSO Logic, very quickly and easily, you can use this tool to build out a business case that you can then take to your leadership to get funding approval to start migrating your apps. It also gives you the flexibility to build out business cases at an individual application stack level as well. So you don't need to do it for your full application portfolio landscape, but you might have certain business units who want to know, hey, what would this look like on AWS, or can you build out a cost model for me for migrating my app to AWS? Again, this tool can do it quite easily and quite quickly for you. So I'm now going to move on to the third demo, which is on AWS Migration Hub. So AWS Migration Hub is our tool to help you, or single pane of glass, to help you monitor, manage, and execute the automation of your migration. It's integrated with our native AWS migration tools and also with third-party migration tools as well. So I'll quickly walk you through a demo of this. Now we've got I guess this is the dashboard for AWS Migration Hub. You can see the latest updates on the status of your migrations. You can, at a very high level, get a backlog of where things are at and what's been completed. And you've got a timeline view as well of the status of your migration. Now I'm going to click into our customer service app that we spoke about before. Now you can see that this app is completed. I migrated this app over the weekend, which is why it's marked as completed and deleted. And I've used SMS to migrate the app. So just by clicking in that, it actually brings us straight through to the SMS console, and you can view the status of the migration. And if you really want to, you can also launch the instance from here as well. Now, AWS Migration Hub, also very similar to Risk Networks and TSO Logic, also groups servers into application stacks. So you can view a status of where the application stack migration is, and if you want to drill down even deeper into the status of an individual server, that's where you can go into SMS and view the status of the migration. Along with that, it's also integrated with, as I mentioned before, our native migration tools, but also third-party migration tools as well. So some customers might have a choice to use different migration tools for different types of workloads, depending on your RPO or RTO. But the good thing about AWS Migration Hub is that you can use it as a single pane of glass, and it integrates with these tools, both third-party and our native tools as well. So just to summarize, I walked through Risk Networks as a tool to perform a deep discovery. understand dependency mapping, view the actual network communication and network traffic flow in your organization, and ultimately use all of that information to build a data-driven decision as a backlog of your migration plan. We then looked at TSO logic to automate the creation of your business case, both at the entire portfolio landscape view, but also at the individual application stacks. And then finally, server migration, AWS Migration Hub and AWS Server Migration Service as that single pane of glass to both monitor and manage the execution of your migration. I'll now pass it back to Neil for the close.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what have we learnt today? We've gone through and talked about some of the common challenges that customers face, and then we've moved on and talked about how these have been alleviated in terms of our experience over the years, in terms of tooling, obviously, and methodology. And, you know, it is a very different world to what it was a few years ago in terms of the capability of those tool sets and the support you have. And if I reflect back on that personal journey that I opened with, you know, I mentioned 55 years of migrations, 13 times in that 55 years. I myself have moved country 9 times in 11 years. So I made up 9 of the 13. But, you know, my experience with undertaking migrations was very different to my parents and grandparents. You know, I didn't have to go on a ship for 6 months and go through the turmoil and all the things associated with that. I mean, I had the luxury of having a very good understanding of the countries that I moved to by getting on the net and using certain resources. So it's a new world, yeah? Everything is there to help you, you know, to be successful in this journey. And in the last half an hour or so, I've seen, you know, felt people in the audience getting encouraged by what they've heard and almost running out the door to do their migrations, right? Yeah. That's, you know, that's great. But before you do that, just think about what you want to achieve and your objectives, okay? And again, I reflect back on that personal analogy. When my relatives, when my parents came to Australia, they came from a very poor background. So they wanted a better life, yeah? And they got that. Now, as an organisation, as a business, if you will, what do you want out of this, you know, this sort of initiative, undertaking a migration? Be very clear about that, and that will be a huge part to being successful, yeah, in undertaking that sort of initiative. So I strongly encourage you to get on that ship, or that plane nowadays, I'd say, if you can move country. You have all the support available to you from your account teams at AWS and also our partner network, and it's a journey that we're very happy to help you with and answer any questions, and hopefully you bear the fruits of migration success. Thank you for your time today. Hope you enjoyed the summit.